Welcome everybody to today's webinar, Benefits Realization, Combining Project Management and Change Management to Achieve Project Success. The speaker today is Ori Schibi. Ori is a business analyst, project manager, a change management consultant, an agile consultant. He's an all-around amazing guy. I've known him for years. For Procept Associates, he's our business analyst, practice lead, and very active in helping us with our agile and change management, other deliveries as well. I'd like to introduce Ori on this topic. Ori, take it away.
Hi, thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Good afternoon, or hi, wherever you are. The topic of change management, or rather the topics of change management and project management have been growing and going, of course, in parallel, and inevitably we got to be able to connect them, especially that these days the focus is starting to shift more towards change management. Many people don't exactly understand what change management is. Unfortunately, many organizations also don't understand. And if we do one that is project management or change management without the other, we may end up either failing or delivering something great that is just not right. So in the next hour or so, we're going to try to look into a few basic concepts of change management and then focus on, surprisingly or not, some good old-fashioned techniques, right? Some good old-fashioned basics that will allow us to connect the two, the project management and the change management. Otherwise, we may end up with, again, with the wrong result. So, again, Ori Schibi, I have been doing those 4 areas that Kevin has mentioned for many years. And as far as I'm concerned, in what I do, these are 4 pillars that must be considered, right? Business analysis, which is talking about the product and making sure that we understand the needs. Project management, taking it to success. Change management, making sure that it's the right success, right? And agile, which is mixing with these 3, because agile is a reality in many organizations and continuing to be a growing reality. Just connect here. Okay, so this is what we're going to do, a little bit of introduction about change. Then I'm going to talk about 3 things that we must baseline ourselves with when we talk about change management. Truths, challenges, and barriers that recognizing and articulating them can help us. A little bit of a practical application of some change theories, really not much. Take a look at leadership, because we do need leadership in order to enable effective and sustainable change. And then connecting change and projects, which is the main thing here. Let's start with the introduction part. There's only one constant, Einstein said, and it's the fact that things are changing. And we got to recognize that, unfortunately, sometimes things are changing too much, and we find ourselves in organizations where change cycles begin, they barely end, and they just mix up with each other to the point that we get change fatigued, right? We don't know exactly where we are in a change cycle. We are not sure exactly what is going on, and especially that we don't see really the benefits that the change is bringing. A couple of other things. Going back to the 1990s, it was Carter, John Carter, was the first person who actually pointed out that the large majority of change initiatives end up failing. This number has been reinforced more than once since, and it's even more than that. So imagine or look around, more than 80% of change initiatives in organizations end up failing. Now, the failure doesn't mean that the change initiative is canceled or shut down or outright failed. It means that somehow we fail to realize the benefits, we fail to deliver on the intent, especially to the full extent or to a reasonable extent that produces enough critical mass of value and benefits. This number is staggering, 80%. It's 4 out of 5. It doesn't get much better than that, or worse than that, rather, when we talk about odds. And we got to check why, because most of these change initiatives are not bad ideas. They are not wrong. They are good ideas or even great ideas that somehow they are not implemented properly. And a lot of this failure can be attributed to a disconnect between the change initiative, the top of the organization, the strategic layer, and the project, which are the tactical layers that are actually taking us through this change. That disconnect is the problem. And of course, if we had a magic bullet, we would all be able to be rich and happy, fixing all problems. But there's really no silver or magic bullet. What we need to look at are basic things. Just making sure that we do things the right way, taking a step back, checking the context, checking the business case, making sure that we're on the right track, making sure that we collaborate with people around us. And we're going to see toward the end of this session how these things all play along. There are some things to ponder about change. What's currently happening in your career and your organization? And how is it working? So we're all going through changes. Some of these changes, of course, we initiate. And as a result, we want them, right? I mean, if I decide to change something, I'm happy or I like it, and I'm going to buy into that and pursue success. Our problem begins, especially when other people are forcing changes on us, right? Somehow, whether it's at work or not at work, if somebody comes to me and tells me I need to change something, it's not going to be easy. I'm not going to be happy. I have my paradigms. I have my ways of doing things. And all of a sudden you introduce something else that, number one, I'm not sure if it's a better thing. Number two, I don't know what's going to happen and how painful it's going to be to get there. And guess what? I'm not sure I'm going to like it. Let's now exacerbate it into the reality that we constantly go through changes in our organization. Most of them that we don't want, most of them that put us in a position of, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen with me, with my reputation, with my knowledge, with my sources of power, with my career, right? I'm not sure I'm going to be there at the end of that change. So all these things add up. And we find ourselves in situations where we don't necessarily want to be. And then, of course, they roll one into another, one into each other. So one foundation to talk about is that change really is a continuous reinforcing cycle. It's not really an event. The projects along the change initiative are events, right? So projects start and end, and they will take us, hopefully, from where we are to where we need to be, right? We will build products or services or produce results, and they're going to be tangible, and they're going to be pieces, hopefully in the right direction. But they have to consider all aspects of the change, including especially the people, right? Well, first of all, it's the biggest strength an organization can have. If you recall, or you can check that many years ago, about 20 years ago, there was a company called Dofasco, and their slogan was, our product is steel, but our strength is people, right? And couldn't be more true for any other organization. That's the strength. The most amazing thing, I was joking about it, that in many engagements that I've had throughout the years, at some point when things did not go right, somebody came to me and said, you know, Ori, this organization would be great if not for the people. And I looked, and it was very awkward because I wanted to laugh, but I wasn't sure if they were joking or not. But really, if not for the people, there is no organization, right? So the projects are finite engagements that have start and end, and they produce a unique something on the way to deliver that big change initiative. But the change itself, you see the reinforcing cycle. we are leading change, then we manage the change, and then we are producing results that take us to the next change. And of course, if we don't change, we will stay stagnant, and we all know that there's no option, right? We must be able to move technology, processes, social trends. So we must be able to update, and we notice that in recent years, or more than recent, change is not only constant, but much more rapid and almost overwhelming, right? Many more things change much faster than they used to before. So again, the reinforcing cycle is leading it. That is, it has to start from somewhere, the message, the vision. And then, of course, making sure that we are doing it the right way. And managing change is really about the transition, which is one of the big problems that we have, right? The transition. Because at some point, I know it's a great idea, and I'm trying to tell you it's a great idea. But at some point, I've got to make sure that you buy in. Believe me that it's a great idea. That's good. We are now on the same page, sort of. But the journey, the transition is not going to be necessarily smooth as we hope. Right? So why change initiatives fail? A lot of these things that are on the screen could be attributed also to why projects change, right? It's just in a different context. Absence of leadership consensus. So many times the direction and or the way that we want to take are not consistent. Lack of accountability. We all know that people at all levels and at all layers in the organization are good at pointing fingers, right? It's not me, it's him, it's not me, it's her, right? So accountability is transparency and decision-making and timely decision-making and decisions that make sense, right? May not be popular, but the right decision. So we definitely have accountability problems. In more than one occasion, when we talked about accountability in projects, stakeholders asked me to prepare a presentation about what accountability means, because we know we use the word, but apparently we don't use it properly. Failure to communicate, of course, resources, always a problem. Planning, failure to measure, failure to see how big this change is. When I go to somebody and I say that the only thing I'm going to do is to automate your process and take away your paper, it may sound very trivial, but is taking the paper away from the process going to be the only thing that changes? What about the way people do things? What about the way people feel? What about the fact that they're not sure what's going to happen with them, right? So it's not only the product and the process that I'm improving. It's especially about the people. Disjointed team, of course, missing feedback. Many times communications appear to be two-way, or we try to make them look two-way, but they're not. Even the big announcements that usually start change initiatives happen sometimes in the format of a town hall. But we all know that many times town halls will produce a message and allow people to interact and to provide feedback and ask questions. But I find that many town halls are almost made up to look like that. But really, the questions are vetted in advance. The answers are prepared in advance. And it may look like it's trying to be transparent, but when you come out, you don't necessarily feel it was. Right? So we got to make sure that the feedback is collected throughout that transition. Of course, resistance that we're going to talk about, it's natural, it's normal, it's pretty much inevitable. So we got to be able to handle that and understand where it's coming from. And then lack of defined outcomes. We can say that projects in general do have outcomes. Change initiatives, sometimes they're less tangible, less measurable, harder to measure, harder to see. So let's take a look at three things that I'm going to talk about that we must recognize about change, right? Some truth, some challenges, right? So let's recognize, number one, change is hard. If somebody tells you it's going to be easy, they're either, let's put it gently, not telling you the truth, or alternately, they don't know what they're up against. Part of that, number two, is that change is expensive. Right? Guess what? It's not going to be easy, and it's going to be expensive. We are going to have to put resources, we're going to have to put an effort, and we're going to have to have a plan. And related to it is number 3, change takes time, right? So again, an extension of it's going to be easy, somebody's going to say, oh, and it's going to be quick, right? And we got to recognize probably not going to happen. Let's also have a couple of assumptions, right? Because I think that stating assumptions is very important. It's putting ourselves on the same page. I will get back to assumptions because people who work with me or take classes with me know that I'm a fan of assumptions when they're managed properly, right? A few assumptions. One, it's best facilitated by developing ownership of pieces and of the process, right? I got to be able to delegate, and I got to be able to identify my change agents and owners of pieces along the way, because if I don't do that, again, this is going to help me build accountability, and if I don't do that, I'm not going to get it. Also recognize that probably my experience shows that people do not resist the change itself. They resist the pain and the threat and the transition, right? So if I could beam you, right, from one point to another and tell you, hey, we're starting here and I'm going to beam you to the future, right? Or beam you to that desired state, you're going to say, I'll take it. But people just don't want to go through that pain. And number 3, change leadership involves helping people make better choices in the context that we have, right? So again, I mean, our means are going to be through communications and training throughout the change process. But really, our job is to change how people view things, right? And to make sure that the decisions that they make are as much as possible the right decisions based on the information that we have and based on the full set of information that we know. And then I want to talk about 3 other things, right? So first of all, we know that most failures, but just like most success stories, cannot be attributed to one event, cannot be attributed to one person, right? There's usually a chain of events, a series of things. There may be a trigger, there may be a defining moment, but excuse me, it's very rare to really point at one thing and say, that's it. So really, let's set up those rules so we all agree with each other. I believe that rule number 1 is organizations do not change, people do. Right now, we got to take it with a grain of salt because we all know that once we reach the age of 12, 13, we no longer change, right, as people. I cannot change people, but at the same time, I can change people's attitudes and views, right, within the organization. Rule number 2 says it's not the change, it's the transition. I talked a little bit about it before. So people, again, are not afraid of the result. They are not afraid of the promise. They just don't know what's going to happen in between. And they're not sure that we are going to get to that desired future state. And number 3, change begins with an ending, right? But do not undermine it. What does it mean? All the theories talk about either an ending, transition, and a beginning, or unfreezing, transition, and refreezing, right? So we start with an ending. That is, we are going to introduce a change that will, will put an end to the current way of doing things, and then it's going to take us to the new way of doing things. But our tendency is to sometimes undermine the current way. When we see resistance, when we see that people are not inclined to buy into the change, we tend to undermine the current state. And then we're going to say, look, I mean, there's really a better way of doing things. And actually, the current way is not good. And that thing is not right. And you don't know how to do it. And sometimes it actually hurts people because it's the same people who introduce the current way of doing things. All of a sudden, you tell them how bad it is. Right? So we got to be able to build on it a little bit differently. We also have 3 barriers. One is that we fail to see really the full set of components here. the need to understand what's going on in the transition, and then of course we fail to see where we're going. We fail to move in that direction. A big announcement is not enough. And then we fail to finish. We fail to show people, here are the results. Here is the new way. Here are the benefits, right? Don't forget, every time when we say the word benefit, it got to be put in context, because before the benefits, we have outputs. Outputs is what you see, is the product that we built, for example. And then we have outcomes. Outcomes are the results of what we do. And then we have benefits. And this is why it's better than it used to be before. Value, something meaningful, right? So these are the three barriers. And then we have three challenges. Framing the scope of the change. Let's frame, let's define what is in scope and what is out of scope. Again, not on the project level, of the change level. When we go through a framing exercise, we end up realizing early on that we are up against a much bigger thing than we initially thought. Because especially in today's world and all the moving parts, few things are simple. So I want to identify the complexities that we are going to face, and I want to identify the complicated parts that can be broken down to smaller, more manageable pieces. Challenge number 2 is the need to create, or failing to create, a compelling vision. Vision is big. What does it mean big? Vision is thinking about what and where and how we want to be at the end. What type of organization, what type of performance. It has to be clear, but not too clear. And it has to be measurable to a degree. It's almost like a North Star that should guide us. And that vision will lead us in its direction, and most likely that change initiative is going to be like sailing, and we all know that sailing rarely goes in a straight line, right? So talking about sailing, I mean, there's going to be currents and waves and tides and winds, and we may not get to that vision exactly the way we want it, but that's the idea, right? Let's understand what we're up against. Challenge number 3 is managing the transition. And again, going back to the transition, because this is where we are going to get people frustrated, upset, afraid, disillusioned. This is why we're going to lose the buy-in if we don't manage the transition properly. So going with these realities and challenges forward is very important to make sure that we set the expectations straight and that we understand each other. So with that, of course, the transition model looks like that: the unfreezing, right, the changing or the transition, and then the refreezing. But the most amazing thing, when people ask, would you rather work for the change or just to complain, 81% of people asked if they had to make a choice. I mean, we're all good at complaining, of course, but remember, most of us don't really want to make a big effort to paying the price. We want to get the benefits in the model of sort of not in my backyard. So yeah, we can do it in different ways, not on my back. So the reality of change, and in every change slide deck, you're going to see some sort of a iceberg, and here too. It's pretty simple. This iceberg, and it's inspired by Gareth Morgan, Professor Emeritus at Schulich, that on the first week of the MBA, he introduced the concept of 85-15, which is different than the Deming 85-15. But he was talking about the fact that, again, extrapolated here, that unfortunately, 85% of the change is beneath the water level. Unfortunately, we spend most of the time pretty much 85% above water. Most of what we see in the project is going to be above water. Nobody says it's not important, but above water is more about the transitional aspect, about the product, about the process, about the tangibles, right? And yes, they are visible, but unfortunately, sometimes the visibility requires us to just, as somebody that I know quoted, just shuffle shuffle chairs on the deck of the Titanic, right? If we're going down, it doesn't matter in what order it's going to be. So we got to recognize that under the water or on the water level, we're going to have a political aspect. Below the water, we're going to have a people aspect. And then, of course, deep underwater, this is where the transformation happens. It's the cultural aspect. This is where the underlying sources of resistance and behaviors are going to come from. And we must be able to handle that. And unfortunately, the ratios are just backwards. We spend more on the visible, tangible, above water stuff, even though most of the happenings, most of the action takes place underwater. So let's take a look at a couple of practical applications of change theory. And I think that this diagram really gives us a wonderful way of illustrating the change process. We start on the left, of course, when the change is introduced. Quite often, there's going to be a little bit of an uptick in people's performance. Sometimes it's because people are going to say, oh, finally we are changing, and their morale is going to go up temporarily. And sometimes it's going to be because people don't believe in the change, and they're going to have an uptick in their performance to prove how great things are right now and why we don't need the change. Either way, we got to take it from here. So if they don't believe in the change, of course, we got to do a better job now, because otherwise we are dipping down. And if they believe in the change and they show us that they're happy, their happiness is probably not going to last for too long, simply because they're going to realize that things are not going to be as fast and easy as they go. But then we start sliding. Every change process will go through that slide. And that slide may change in depth and or in duration for different people within different environments. But fact is that we're all going to go through that. And along the way, people are going to start getting concerned, and they're not going to know what's going on. They're going to be afraid, and they're going to feel threat, and they're going to feel guilt. And think about it, that at any point, we may find ourselves losing them. Not losing them there as in they leave the organization, which is also a possibility. Losing them as in we lose their buy-in, right? We lose their support, and it depends now what's the nature of their concern or fear. Sometimes they're just going to check out. Sometimes they may go as far as almost sabotage our effort, right? So again, it's a hand holding, and that's the transition. And if we don't hold their hand in the way they want, that is not too much, not too little, in the right pace, right? It may be a problem, and the challenge is that different people will have a different pace. So I got to create mechanisms here for communications and for training sometimes, and for hand-holding that will be able to accommodate different flavors without too much or too little. Once we lose people throughout that transition stage, it's going to be very hard for us to actually regain their trust, and let alone their buy-in. So let's recognize that it's not going to go smoothly. It's not going to be as clear, as easy, as fast, as cheap as we thought. And let's recognize another thing. Will there be resistance? The answer to this question is an outright yes. I'm not sure to what extent. I'm not sure how it's going to make an appearance, who's going to do it, and what it's going to lead to. But bottom line, there will be resistance, right? So let's just check what is the source of the resistance, and then how we're going to handle that. So resistance can come in all sorts of forms, right? Why is it happening? Why it is happening is a very important factor, because based on the type of resistance, we're going to have to deal with it differently. Sometimes resistance is due to lack of knowledge. The change message does not necessarily trickle down equally. Many people miss the message or miss the essence of the message. So many people are just not aware of what's going on, and that alone is likely to trigger resistance. Sometimes there's lack of knowledge. So we talked about, awareness, lack of awareness or lack of knowledge about the change. Sometimes it's about lack of knowledge about what's required, lack of knowledge about the nature of the work, lack of knowledge about what are the next steps, right? So it's people who know as opposed to the awareness problem before, but they don't know what it means, or they don't know whether they're going to have what it takes to actually go through the transition and continue with their status once we have the new reality. And sometimes the resistance, it's because of lack of desire. So for whatever reason, and we know the reasons, people resist it. They know what's going on, they know what it takes and what they need, they just don't agree with it. Or they just don't feel like changing, or they just don't think that it's a good idea to change. Right? So different types of resistance will require us to utilize different techniques, right? No one technique or one way fits all. Right? So now take a look at breaking it down slightly differently, the top resistance for change. It could be fear, it could be lacking the information, the fear of the loss, right? So I want to make sure that people have the chance to mourn the loss. Really, I feel okay. It's not going to be the same way. Let me just be upset about it a little bit. We have the anger. People sometimes lack the sense of urgency because they have other things to take care of, right? Whether it's other change initiatives or more tactical things, which are not less important, but just distracting them. Bad timing again. And of course, resistance comes as a result of habit, right? We're used to doing things certain ways, and all of a sudden we have to do things different ways. So when we look at resistance, we got to make sure that we deal with it. But before dealing with it, we got to be able to recognize it. Resistance is not necessarily a bad thing, especially not to a certain extent, right? Too much resistance, of course. But we can look here and see that there are two types of resistance or resistance types. On the left, we have, if you like, a more positive resistance. What's positive? All sorts of questions that are really about learning. Questions that show that there is an open mind, or looking even at alternatives. Right? Sometimes people will challenge and say, are you sure it's the right way? Maybe, did you consider something else? And it's our job to hear them. Sometimes it's part of an analysis. Different people have different types of personalities, and some people want to see the bottom line, some people want to see the process or know why. Sometimes it's about outright the need or even the vision, right? So these are probably good types of resistance. Right? They're positive. And we can handle them properly, because if we don't, or if we ignore them, of course, the resistance will shift and grow. And then shifting to the right here, people are too busy to attend, and people go to pursue other initiatives because the message is not clear, or because they're not sure, or because people are ignoring what's going on, or of course campaigning and encouraging others to resist, right? So I want to identify, is it a positive resistance or not, and then handle that, but handle both, not suppress the resistance. Accept it and embrace it, and allow people to express what they have to say. Many times that's going to make the difference. They're going to have concerns and they're going to have questions, and they're all legitimate, and our job is going to be to handle those concerns in a way that shows them that it's thought through and that we have some answers. And now, how to overcome? 3 stages, right? Prepare, recognize that there's going to be resistance, and then show the why. It's not about creating dissatisfaction with the status quo, but it's more about showing that the status quo is not necessarily the best way. And then, of course, reduce uncertainty, because uncertainty will appear there. Then lead, provide and inspiring vision, make sure that the vision trickles down and is converted and reframed to all types of people and personalities, engage them, energize them, and communicate. And then, of course, get them involved, right? Empower leaders, local leaders, and of course, term change agents, right? The people who are going to help us with the credibility, with the message on the ground. Because again, if I'm leading an organization at any capacity and I'm trying to reach and create a rapport with every individual, it's probably not going to happen, right? They're not going to take my word, not in different locations, not in different divisions. And of course, celebrate victories. But in order to celebrate victories, we got to show victories and we got to articulate what constitutes as victory. So yes, resistance is a fact. It's going to happen. It's not bad. It must be handled. And sometimes it's not only the merits of the change that are going to help reduce resistance, it's also the handling of resistance that's going to show them. Next, we're going to take a look at a few leadership items because we need leaders. So what makes a good leader is a big question. And when I'm in a classroom and ask people what makes a good leader, they have a hard time giving me answers. First of all, when we look at the political arena, we know that it's not probably the right place. And the second thing, unfortunately, people even have a hard time identifying leaders within their organizations or within the people that they report to. So there are all sorts of things about leaders, but again, it's not about the popular decision, it's about the right decision. It's about the inspiration and the transparency. It's about the ability from taking you from here to somewhere else. And it's about producing more leaders, not more followers, right? So really grow and empower, right? But these are all sorts of statements, right? But what are really the components of leadership? First of all, vision. They know where they're going, right? And they have to show and prove it. And they manage to do it in a language and way that people understand. They're persistent, right? Right? Again, they're not crazy, but they're persistent in that vision and in the way to get there. They have the stamina because it's not going to be a straight line and it's not going to be easy. They make tough decisions. I skipped one, sorry. Face regulation in the face of sabotage, right? Or in the face of uncertainty. But again, this is also part of making tough decisions. Tough decisions are decisions that right now don't look popular or even right, but on the long run, they're the right decisions. They're in from the long game for the big picture. All these cliches. Respect and take care of the team. So all sorts of philosophies and models have been taking place since, of course, the theory of traits, right? The trait theory of leadership. And now we're talking about more situational, right? We're talking about making sure that
Ori, can you hear me? Ori, we seem to have lost the audio.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, thank you.
Okay, how long ago? Because I started hearing the line disconnecting all of a sudden.
Like 60 seconds or something.
Okay, so I'm just going to slide back up a little bit. So again, stamina, right? Facing regulation in the face of uncertainty and sabotage. And then remember, tough decisions. It means that these are decisions that are considering all these cliches like big picture and end game, right? So talking about not the popular decision, but the right decision. And in retrospective, we can see that. But of course, we don't have the luxury of retrospective in real time. Respect and take care of the team. Remember, a lot has happened since the trait theory of leadership. It's not about my way or the highway. It's about me as a leader taking care of my team and making sure that I accommodate them as much as possible within the context. I love the working on the business and not in the business. And that's the difference really between a leader and a manager. Right? My job is making sure that we take care of the big picture of the business and moving forward as opposed to the tactical things. And of course, again, I create rather than fix, right? Of course, I'm fixing a bigger problem, but I have the more holistic view of the organization. So these are some components of leadership. When we're looking at, we're looking at what leadership is not. It's exactly what we've been flying, right? It's not about quick fixes, right? It's just not going to happen because the quick fixes are just going to put out fires, but those patches are going to start unraveling at some point. It's not about being reactive, right? It's not about being on autopilot. And again, it's not about losing it in the face of uncertainty and surprises. Like, unfortunately, it happens very commonly. It's not about herding, right? The togetherness is more important, right, than any individual success. But we got to really send that message that we are in as a team, right? And whether I pass an assist, I block a shot, or I score a goal or a basket, the most important thing is that we win. It doesn't matter what I did toward that win. And of course, it's not about blaming. It's the opposite, right? It's about really having that big picture mentality. How leaders communicate, again, I mean, it's all an extension of that, from body language and honesty, and knowing the audience and breaking it down as much as possible to accommodate their needs, providing the authority. But they have also ears, and the ears are figurative and practical, right? So we hear what's going on. Leaders should hear what's going on, both what people really say and what's the underlying message, what people don't say. We solicit feedback and we try to be proactive, even though quite often it's very hard for us to keep our heads above water. So really, we talked about leadership. We talked about what change is. We talked about the importance of connecting. But now, sliding into the next page, really, how do we connect the change initiative and the project to make sure that they're aligned with each other? Because if they're not, the finger pointing and the blaming and the problems will begin. Going back to the basics. First of all, a coordinated effort. Quite often, project managers are being installed into projects with no proper context on whether it's the right person, right personality for the job. And unfortunately, sometimes it shows, right? And when we really have to make sure that it's a coordinated effort. And the coordinated effort, and I'll go back to it, includes a very strong bond that has to be created between the sponsor and the project manager. And when I say sponsor, it could be the sponsor of the change, the sponsor of the project, or both if it's not the same person. If we don't have that coordinated effort, it's just going to start getting growingly misaligned. Enroll and get buy-in. Again, the word enroll, right? I'm not telling people what it's going to be. I want to make sure that I engage and I check what's going on and I measure and really bring people in. The right people, all across, but quite often there's very little thought, I mean, beyond the sponsor and the PM, there's very little thought of really who's involved and to what extent. And then starting to get more tangible. Business case, why are we there? Right? Business case is something that is out of scope for project managers because it was done prior to their arrival at the project, but it's going to give us context. And of course, clear vision that we all understand. Realize the trade-offs, the business case, the justification, the objectives are going to help us make the right decisions because trade-offs will need to happen, both within the project and of course, throughout the journey of that change. Learning from our lessons, as organizations, it's pretty amazing, even in the era of Agile, where we have the retrospectives happening on a cyclical basis, ongoing, regular basis, we are still not good at learning lessons. One thing that I find organizations consistently fail with, and this is having a direct impact on change initiatives. Organizations consistently fail in examining lessons and benefits against the original business case. Here's that form. They consistently fail in identifying the benefits against the business case. We do lessons against the project objectives sometimes, but I want to go back to why we even took on that initiative and check to what extent we did that or achieved that. And then what does it mean? Because I don't want to keep making the same mistakes again as an organization. Of course, the whole stakeholder thing, right? Stakeholder analysis is always a challenge because it does not produce stuff that is tangible. Many times it will introduce all sorts of things that are better kept quiet about certain stakeholders. And often we don't have time to do it properly, but it's not only during the initiation of the project. First of all, it's the stakeholders for the change. Second, it has to be on an ongoing basis because stakeholders will change their demeanor and opinions, not to mention the fact that stakeholders will change and that reality will change. Then, define success. Unfortunately, it's still very common that people within the team and people who lead projects and initiatives do not have a clear understanding of the success criteria of what we're trying to do. We have to pick the right approach. This is now talking about, is it suitable for a more agile approach or a more waterfall-like approach? Right? There's no right or wrong right off the bat, but we gotta really check what's applicable because I don't want to use the wrong approach for something. Define the scope properly. And just like we talked about defining the scope of the change initiative, we got to know what part of that initiative the project will handle. Think risk. Remember, coordinated effort. We got to really educate the project manager to look at risks that are bigger than project risks. Looking at risks to schedule and risks to budget is not enough. We got to consider operational risk or business risk or organizational risk, whatever it is that what we do may create or introduce toward the project, so toward the organization. Quality. Quality is an amazing thing because we all know how important it is and we all talk highly about it, but nobody really does much about it. We don't even know how much money we spend on quality. It's very important to define what is that cost of quality and what is acceptable versus unacceptable as far as meeting certain standards or other standards. I'm not talking about failing to meet standards, which is completely unacceptable. Cross-project collaboration. Several years ago, for the first time, it dawned upon me, and then I started using that mechanism to help coordinate across projects. It doesn't necessarily have to be across projects within the same change initiative or within the same program. The most important thing is the coordination for prioritization and for urgency measurement for any project that competes with anything else in the organization for resources, for capacity. And then for that, it requires us to understand our capacity as individuals and as teams. And it requires the leaders to provide clear prioritization criteria so we can work with it or challenge them to do that respectfully. Right? But the cross-project collaboration, it's a very straightforward mechanism. Identifying what your needs are for a certain period of time that is probably equivalent to a sprint or a couple of weeks, right? A work package size almost. The resources, let's see what we need. Let's check who are we going to interact with across the organization? And let's make sure that we coordinate the effort because otherwise we're going to have a claim for the same resource, for the same dollar, for the same bandwidth. And one project is going to have to pay the price, and we want to make sure that the project that pays the price is the right project to pay the price. Of course, those three people, the sponsor, the PM, and the BA, no denying that these three, any two of these, but these three have to work in a coordinated fashion. No denying we have a problem. First of all, the traditional PM-BA friction because of the different ways of looking at things. And of course, the misalignment between sponsorship and the project manager. two people who are supposed to work very closely and coordinated way together. There is a much bigger problem in organizations about sponsorship, and it translates to both change sponsorship and project sponsorship. I always joke that there is no sponsorship management institute yet, and therefore most sponsors lack basic guidance on what they need to do as sponsors. Efficiency and time management, things that really we haven't talked about properly since the 90s, but as a project manager, I must be able to identify what is it within my capacity, right? What can I do to remove all sorts of noises from my schedule, from my timeline, and of course for the team, same thing, and guide them. Because without it, our days are going to continue to be riddled with all sorts of waste. And meetings that should never take place, I'm not talking about all meetings, or emails that should never be produced, I'm not talking about all emails. That leads us to communications. And then basic things, the charter, making sure that the message is clear. And then, of course, assumptions, manage them. Finally, the Project Management Institute has something called assumptions log. This is the way to identify, analyze, and manage assumptions. It doesn't take much, right? But we must come to terms with the fact that we cannot ignore assumptions because they are a gateway into risk. And really, the last basic thing is to perform some sort of a resource analysis for a responsibility summit matrix or RACI chart. Most people who engage in project work are aware of these tools, assumptions and RACI chart. Unfortunately, the majority of them don't use them. Again, if you build any type of schedule without understanding the RACI, you will probably end up with an unrealistic schedule. So that leads us to the last part, right? So let's recognize what is change, right? We cannot manage change, we can only lead it. We manage only the complicated aspect that we can break them down, but the complex aspects related to the people remain. People will follow us only if there is a cool message that resonates with them. I don't recall the last time that people were inspired and started to follow somebody because they showed them graphs and charts, right? We gotta have an inspiring message, a compelling story, a clear vision. And again, remember, realize that it's gonna be like a sailboat. It's not gonna go in a straight line. That vision is an exercise that must be done at the sponsorship level of the change initiative. And if it's not gonna get done properly, it's gonna trickle down all the way to a failed initiative, one of these 80%. Then we need to communicate. Steady streams of messages, but without overwhelming, and again, it's not generic messages, it's messages that are tailored to different people with different flavors of communications. Show the emphasis on the involvement, explain the vision, clarify and define people's roles, reinforce, help people change the paradigms, and of course, celebrate the success. Consolidate, make sure we learn from lessons. We gotta determine what if questions in order to help identify problems and concerns and potential issues, and then validate and manage the resistance. And of course, connect the two. Projects represent change to the organization, but they are part of a big change and they cannot be separately managed. Projects are not unimportant, but they are tactical, while the change initiative is often strategic in its level. And again, back to the basics. And that old manifesto that I have here, where on the left I have things that are important yet visible, and on the right I have things that if I don't manage them, doesn't matter what, I'm not going to be successful in delivering the stuff on the left. The C rates refer to constraints, risks, assumptions, issues, dependencies, the collaboration, the sponsorship, the charter, all these things we talked about. That leads us to the end. So I would like to, of course, encourage questions, but otherwise, I would like to thank everyone for attending. This webinar is a very important piece in, or rather reflects a very important piece in the current struggles that we have in many organizations, which is the constant struggle with projects, the growing realization that it's related to change, and of course, connecting these two.
Excellent.
So at this point, I want to thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon for Eastern Standard Time or anybody else. Kevin,
thank you.
for having me.
Ori, we have a few questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I have a couple questions that have been entered in during the session. For those of you still on the line, you can enter your questions into the questions window on the audio interface. So, Ori, if you could please address this question. The first question was asked by Alex. He said, how much change management is the project management responsible for versus the sponsor? Is the PM the right one to be the change leader?
That's a big question. How much change management the PM should do? The PM should definitely be aware. So the message and the vision are coming from the top. But now we got to coordinate the effort. I cannot, as a project manager, perform the project work in a disconnect from the initiative. So remember, generally, let's simplify. The project work is more related to the product, but the change element is more related to the people and to the day after. Something that as project managers, we're not doing a good job at addressing. So there's no one answer, but like we got to sit down. That's why we say project manager and sponsor got to sit down and define, okay, who's responsible for what? But sponsor provides the message and project manager maintains the context, and then of course revisits with the sponsor when there's misalignment.
Okay. Fatima asks, how does Agile affect the practices of change management?
Oh, that's another hour of webinar. Excellent question. Agile, first of all, Agile introduces change to the organization, because when we manage Agile projects, things in the organization will happen in a different way. People will have to play different roles. Sponsorship is different with the product owner, sometimes broken down from the executive sponsor. So first, change is triggered by Agile projects. Second, of course, if it's a suitable type of project, Agile projects can help deliver more value earlier, right? And helps check, because of the incremental nature, of where we are really toward delivering the value. But don't forget, the Agile is one project at a time, right? Or within one project, versus the change initiative is still going to span across potentially an extended period of time in multiple projects.
Okay. Please remember to enter your questions into the questions window. We have another one from Wojtek. He says, is benefits realization the job of the project or the PM? I think he means the project team.
Yes, so the PM leads that. Again, we all have to work in a coordinated way toward benefit realization. The benefits have to be defined on an organizational level, and then the PM will take those tangible pieces along the way and deliver value toward them. But the PM cannot do it without the team. The PM facilitates it or leads it, right? But it's the team that will do the work that makes up that set of benefits.
Okay, any more questions? We're at the top of the hour. This is your last chance to enter a question into the questions window. Going once, twice. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time today on this webinar. This is one in a series of webinars that we run regularly. Our next one is actually, we're skipping next month, we're skipping June, but in July, we're actually going to have 5 webinars. July is our month of Agile. We're going to have 5 Agile webinars throughout the month. And so wherever you signed up for this one, stay tuned to for details on how to sign up for the others. Thank you, everybody, for all your time.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ori. Bye-bye.
Bye.